Video we are going to go over Julia DataFrames, and I thought a fun way to do that is by going through it by an example. And the example I picked is my energy usage at home. So I have some data files which record my electricity usage, or the electricity usage in the household that I'm in, and it's a fun way to kind of look at some basic functionality of Julia DataFrames. So here I've listed some of the operations we're going to go through: simple reading, inspecting, concatenating, filtering, and applying some functions and aggregations. And we're also going to have some plots just to briefly look at the data. So in order to do all that, I'm importing some basic libraries in Julia. And here in this tuple, I have laid out the data files in which I have my electricity usage. And the first thing we're going to do is to just look at a data frame, loading it in and looking at the first values. So in order to load a data frame from a CSV file, using this operation, I'm looking at the first entry in this array here. We're just going to look at the very first data file at the beginning. So I'm loading this in, and we are of course curious just what the data looks like. And for that, I'm going to run this function here first, then the data frame object, and then the number of rows in that data frame that I would like to look at. And so if I call this, then it shows me the first 5 rows, and here it is. So I have the column names here, so they're all in capital letters in this data file. It shows me what kind of data type it is, and then it goes through it. And you see there's a notes column that doesn't really have data, but you see I have cost, a date, a start time, end time. So I get my usage resolved by hour, each hour of each day that I have in this record. So it's quite a bit of granular data. It's very interesting, and also what I paid in this hour. If I just want to see how many data points I have, I call the size function. So I have 8,784 records and 8 columns here. And if I want to just get a little bit more information on my columns, I can call the describe function. That's usually quite useful to get just an overview of what's actually happening here. For example, this first column, electric usage, this actually tells me this is the only entry that I have in here, right? The date is kind of giving a min-max, and same with like the end time and start time, and everything else. Yeah, like even you can get like a mean value for numeric data. There's only one numeric column in here right now because the cost is actually a string in this data frame. So we have to also deal with that. So, but as I showed you up here, we have 4 different files with the data, and to load them all into a single data frame, I'm doing a concatenation of data frames. So first I'm using this kind of list compression way of making an array of data frames, and then I'm calling vcat on these data frames to get a fully concatenated data frame. And so as I'm loading this in, it will then tell me size of data frame. So we have a lot more entries now, right? And as we see here, this is everything from 2019, actually here 2019 in August, all the way to roughly around now 2022 in September. And I have this data frame, and one thing that I'm a little bit worried about is, well, these are kind of like files that are that might be overlapping in dates, and so I just want to make sure I get only unique rows, and I'm just running this as this function unique. And what this will do is filter out non-unique values. Now, nothing happened here. Actually, those were all unique values, but this is something you can consider whenever you want to just deduplicate your records. And now we've seen that we had all these columns here, and they're definitely interesting for future analyses. In this example, I'm actually just interested in a subset of these columns. So what I'm doing here is I'm just selecting these 3 columns, the date, the usage, and the cost on every row. I call this df sub as a subset. And then I'm just going to look at the first 2 rows, just what it looks like. And here we have it, 3 columns left, date, usage, cost. And you see the date is now duplicated because we have that data for 24 hours in that date. So that is just kind of, run through this here. Now, if I then want to actually look at, this should be a markdown. So we have this cost here, and it's a string value, and it's not actually something we can, work with as a number. So we have to parse it into a number, ideally a float. And in order to do that, I'm going to run this parse function on the column. So here I'm parsing, and I'm basically going through each x value of this cost dollar column. I'm going to take out the first character of the string, which is this $sign here, and then I'm parsing it into a float 64. And if I call this function on the column cost, this is how I index the column cost, and I call my new column just a little bit more nicely cost dollar, then this is how I'm actually creating a new column. If I run all this, my data frame now has 4 columns, and one is called cost dollar. It is a float 64, and it's really a numeric value here. And this is something I can work with now. Let me just kind of get rid of that original cost column. I'm just going to subset that and drop that out. And let me also rename some of these columns. So date and usage, I would like to, first of all, make this all lowercase. And in usage, I know it's kilowatt hours, so I also want to label that as a unit here in my data frame. And so I'm also just looking at the column right afterwards. Also notice here what I'm doing is I'm calling rename with an exclamation mark, meaning that actually changes the data frame df sub in place. I'm then applying this mapping of names. And with that, now actually I'm interested in what I spend by month in a year. So what I actually want to get to is I want to aggregate these costs throughout a month. And so what I would like to do is I would like to have this field year month that really just says, okay, 2019 August, and we'll use that to aggregate my data. And so for that, I'll do another function operation. In this case, I will take, I will convert my date into a string, and this is what I do by using this. And then I'll take index 1 to 7, which is exactly this first month and date. And I run this method, and I'll take a look at what the data frame looks like afterwards. I see I have this year month column now, and it's 2019-08. And I just expect that this will continue with all the other dates. And what does that let me do? What I really want to do is I want to get the sum of the usage and the cost for each year month. And this is what I'm doing now with this aggregation. And so aggregation is kind of a big deal, and it's always kind of tricky to get that compact and readable. And here's one example on how to do that. So the combine function usually works like combine basically a group by where I designate my data frame and one or more columns that I want to group the data by. In our case, this is year month. And then it should return me a data frame in which the new columns are aggregates of what I want to do. For example, I'll just use usage kilowatt hour again, but I'm actually going to use the summation of all usage by year month, and I'll do the same thing with the column, with the cost column. And so, and if I do that and then plot the first couple of rows, it'll become clear what I actually did there. So here we have the year month, we have 2019 August, September, October, and the sum of what I actually paid in those months. All right, so this is when I just moved in, $16 the first month. Yeah, that looks reasonable. And the usage in kilowatt hours, right? So it's also lower usage, and then, well, we'll get to that, how it actually increases in the winter time. And now that I have that, let's actually make some plots and look at what it looks like. So plotting, I have a different, another video on that, but just some basic plotting where I'm just grabbing the column year month and the column cost, because I'm interested in looking at cost over time. And here is what we see. I've just made that as a line. Each kind of point in this line plot is a month and the cost of the month. And we see the cost is usually quite high in the winter time because part of our heating is with electricity. We happen to have a very uninsulated home. That's also something we're planning to change. But that's why we're in the month, in the winter months, we have higher usage and higher cost with it. We see overall cost kind of slightly going up. So we could ask ourselves, oh, so how is it actually with our consumption, right? And we see here exactly what I mentioned also. We have really high consumption in some of the winter months. That's also gotten better. And overall, our consumption, though, is steady throughout the year. There's actually no significant increase, so maybe slightly higher here in our spring and summer months than before. But what might actually really interest us is what does it cost, the price per kilowatt hour. So what I'm doing here in this first row is, again, applying another function. It's really dividing the cost by usage, applying this function, and now I have my price, dollar per kilowatt hour by month. Right, so it's a little bit the division on that aggregated data. And if I plot that, then we see something that a lot of us experience over time. The cost for electricity has gone up. So in the beginning, and this goes a little bit zigzag because of rounding errors as well as some time use tariffs. So in some months we use electricity at different times. And so the price has been steadily going up. And more or less in this year, we all have seen an increase in electricity prices, right? So this is what's happening here right now. The very last month of September, since I only have half a month of data in here, I would kind of disregard that for now. This lower price, overall the trend is clear. We're paying more for electricity. So one more reason to be mindful about electricity use. Now, so this is the end of this video. I hope you learned a little bit about DataFrames in Julia. I'll come around and make another analysis video. There's actually a lot more to get out of these data files of my electricity usage. So stay tuned for another video on that. Thank you and have a good day.